when I retired 5 years ago, I moved down from Inverness down to Edinburgh, and at that stage had a conversation with my son, who was in his early 30s at that stage, about climate issues, and he was very anxious about everything, and I had said to him, surely, Ian, if it was really that bad, it would be all over the news, and governments would be taking it seriously. And he had thrown up his hands in horror, as youngsters do, and said, "Oh, Mum." So I had decided I needed to educate myself. I did 3 climate courses with the Future Learn, which is an online platform, and was absolutely horrified. And at the end of that, what they had suggested was that there are 3 things that individuals can do to take things forward in terms of climate. The first one is to make changes in their own lives. The second one is to talk to people about it and to try and get other people to realise just what the situation is. And the third one is to harangue government and institutions and organisations, and to try to get them to make change as well. And I started doing that and felt that probably wasn't actually enough. And I was going along on Friday mornings to the Scottish Parliament, which is in Edinburgh, with the Fridays for Future youngsters, just to support them, and thought, actually we do need to be out on the streets with this. And I'd gone along to a few XR meetings and felt a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit about it's just...
This is Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah, it's just too out there, and having spent a professional life following the rules, it was a bit kind of challenging to think of going out and breaking them. But on the other hand, I do feel strongly that not enough is being done, particularly by governments, and so I wanted to support all of the people who were actually more confident about being more active in getting the climate message out there. So some of the things that I've done with my involvement has been help to make Red Rebel costumes for the Edinburgh Red Rebel group, which is part of Extinction Rebellion. And also I had got involved with the Shrub Cooperative, which is an organisation which is a zero waste charitable organisation in Edinburgh. And my initial contact with them had been they organise with the universities, so that at the end of each university term, when students were going back to wherever they came from, and they had all of their pots and pans and dishes and towels and bedding and whatever and clothes, that they didn't want to have to take halfway across the world with them. So Shrub gathered everything together and sorted it all out, and then had a free shop at the beginning of the next university term, so that the new intake of students could just come along and take whatever they needed that had been left behind previously, to avoid everything being wasted. And that seemed to me like such a fabulous approach, the whole idea of zero waste, and if you're not using it, give it to somebody that can.
So it's really about cultural change, isn't it, and behaviour change.
Yeah.
This is the area that you're becoming active in.
And also when I was involved with the student uplift stuff, I realised that I have some skills that some of the younger people who were involved in volunteering perhaps didn't have, and realised that actually my mending skills were probably a real bonus, and that if I could pass on some mending skills to other people, that would be a way of amplifying the impact that I was able to have as an individual. Because everybody that if I was able to teach somebody to sew, then that means that going forward, anything that they repaired and then saved from going to waste would in a way be down to me as well. So I felt that that was something that I very much wanted to do. And Shrub were great because they were running sewing sessions at that stage, so I started going along and helping out with those, and then set up a Tuesday evening sewing session, which I'm now keeping going. I was going to say myself, but there are many other sewing volunteers coming on board as well.
So you're really driven from a sustainability perspective rather than necessarily a creative perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think also in terms of the mending that I'm helping people with, it's about function, because it's really interesting, until I had gone along to the initial sewing sessions, the idea of visible mending wasn't something I had ever come across. So any kind of mending that I was doing was automatically going to be something that was hidden, and we don't want to see the mending, we don't want to know that this has been repaired. But then, refreshingly, the young people come along, and I was helping a young woman to repair her rucksack. And I said to her, I'll just get you some thread that'll match. Oh, she said, I don't want thread that'll match. I want something nice and bold, so that people can see that I have repaired this. And I thought, well, gosh, that's an amazing attitude. And that has really changed how I approach mending. And now, one of my first questions is going to be to people is, do you want this to be a visible mend or an invisible mend? Is it about, if you're wearing a visible mend, you're automatically saying, that you're behind.
It's a flag, isn't it? It's a flag.
You're behind sustainability. You want this to be something that represents you. So
we find that a bit with the thrifting as well.
Yes.
That now it's seen as a badge of honour to wear thrifted clothes,
Yeah.
whereas even 5 years ago was still a
Yeah.
bit of stigma about it, and in some places there still is stigma about it.
I think somebody had actually said this to me at one stage, was that they had been very poor when they were young, and that they then felt that they couldn't go back to thrifted or second-hand clothing because it was too triggering in terms of the uncomfortable experiences they had experienced as a child and young person. So I think whilst it's great, it's maybe not for everybody. But one of the other things I had done was a couple of years ago, in fact it's maybe nearly 3 years ago, I had signed up to a thing which was to not buy any new clothes. I think it was for a 6-month period or something. And basically I'm now 2.5 years into that, and I've bought 3 new pairs of socks in a pack and a pair of new shoes, and that's it. And everything else is either stuff that I already had or second-hand, or made from bits that I had lying around. So
and you told me you're making masks too.
Yes,
during. Tell us about that and COVID.
At the beginning of COVID, I live in flats, and there's quite a big community of different buildings, all in the same community, and we have a Facebook page. So at the beginning of COVID, because I have a bit of a background understanding of public health, I could see that masks were going to be a thing. So I quite quickly got onto the bandwagon of making masks, and posted on the Facebook page for my neighbours to say that if anybody wanted masks, to let me know and I would make them for them. And because at that stage we were in lockdown, so people could only do their daily exercise, so they daily exercised past my patio, and I threw packets of masks over the hedge to some of my neighbours that I had made from second-hand materials that I had in my stash. It was one of the occasions where you're kind of like really glad that you've got so much in your stash, because it certainly gave me the opportunity to use up quite a lot of it. And one of my neighbours owns the fabric shop locally, and he very kindly delivered elastic to me, so that was great, because it meant that I could have the elastic for around people's ears. And that I found not only helped me in a time where people felt that they couldn't do anything positive or to help, it made me feel that I was doing something to help, which was good for me. It gave people access to masks that might not have been able to access them very easily other than that. In giving masks to my neighbours, I got to know a lot more of my neighbours, and they got to know me, and I think it helped us to build more in the way of community.
So thinking about that a bit more, like the health of community, health of yourself, and well-being benefits from sewing.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit, expand on that a bit in your experience of it?
I think that, during my working life, you would very often find that you were very busy, but that work came in and work went out, and you didn't actually have something tangible at the end of that. And I think when you're actually creating something and making something by hand, that you actually have a physical thing that you've made, and I have always found that quite satisfying, that you can actually see that you've done something and you've achieved something. And I think that having I was going to say the skill of being able to sew, mine is, I should absolutely be clear that I'm a very basic sewer, and that the mending that I do is for function rather than anything particularly glamorous. But it's certainly something that I feel has helped me, because it certainly gave me purpose during lockdowns and during, I think, a very difficult time for everybody. I think we all kind of clutched at whatever we could that would support us, and I certainly found that doing repair to clothing was something that helped me, and also to be able to pass on those skills to somebody else, I have found very rewarding as well.
And what about the physical process itself? Do you find it relaxing? Does it encourage conversation?
Certainly at the sewing sessions, when you're all sitting round and you're all doing your little bit, it is a very calming, and it also it joins you very much as a group, and you can even actually be sitting silently, but still kind of in concert, if you like. I think that it is one of the things that's very good to do. But I think maybe I find that hand sewing is more mindful and satisfying. I think sometimes when I'm using the sewing machine, that you can you give yourself deadlines and things, you put a bit of pressure on yourself, and you think, oh God, it's all going to go wrong. So sometimes it can be a wee bit more stressful than the hand sewing side of things. But one of the things that I quite often stress to people who, when they're learning is, if it all doesn't work out, you can just, snip the stitches and take it back out and start again, usually. It's usually not too bad if it all goes horribly wrong.
And I guess you're helping mostly young people to learn to sew. How are you finding they respond to the enabling, the empowering nature of being able to solve these problems?
I think young people, they're interested in acquiring the skill to be able to do things for themselves.
A generation sort of missed out a bit, didn't they?
They really did, because when we were at school, when I was at school, I remember having to hand sew a dress in primary 7 that had darts and everything. It was really complicated, but hand sewed the whole thing. I can clearly see it in my head. And youngsters don't get that opportunity, not that you want it, but they don't learn, I think, even basic sewing skills in many schools these days, and I think that is a great shame. And I think that the link between the climate situation and sewing, I think, is very clear, and I think educationally it's a real opportunity to give people the skills that they can actually do something about climate by learning a relatively simple new skill.
And that's a way of reducing the textile waste, is
absolutely,
it?
Absolutely. That if people can keep their clothes going for a wee bit longer, that helps to reduce the impact that they have, both in terms of carbon dioxide, but also in terms of pollution. That if less clothing was being produced, then the impact would reduce as well.
So based on what you know, how do you feel that skill transfer could happen to that younger generation? Have you thought about that? I mean, obviously you're helping in a way, but...
Yeah, I think it absolutely has to go into the curriculum and be part of what happens in schools, but I think we're still at, I think, early stages in terms of getting these things to become just standard how things work. And I think because there has been, you know, the shift between my generation and the current youngsters, there's a big gap in the middle of you know, potentially a lot of the teachers who are out there might not necessarily have the skills unless they are specific, you know, textile teachers. So, you know, I think my generation, you could probably sit down, you know, with a half a dozen of your pals, and we would all be able to sew on a button without any difficulty. But my understanding is that now, as many as 60% of people can't sew on a button, which is a very basic skill.
So you've kind of come to this through your son, who's an engineer, and so really, like, the mental health aspects of being able to take some action are kind of quite important, aren't they? This is what's led you to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when I had initially realised how horrendous the situation was, I absolutely felt that I had to do as much as I could. So, I mean, within our lives, you know, we've changed our diet, we've got rid of the car, as much as possible have changed our heating system in the house to use less gas. And, you know, we've changed so much within our own lives, but I just felt that there was more that I had to do, and any opportunity to do that makes me feel better. So the more that I do to
it's influencing change, isn't it? But really, I guess it's policies and governments that really can take the big action.
It absolutely is. But on the other hand, the governments don't move unless the public are at their heels nipping and saying, we need this doing now. You know, so, you know, you can't, I find that I can't say, oh, we have to do policy first and, you know, we can bring the public along with us later. You have to do the whole lot all at the same time, and try and do as much as you can to make people realise just what a dreadful situation we're in. And obviously, you know, in this country we are very, very lucky because a lot of the impacts that are happening due to our behaviours up until this point in my life are happening in the global south, which is a dreadful burden to bear. So you know, so we have to do everything that we can.
It sounds like you've gone from being a fairly conservative pharmacist to a bit of a rebel here, Mary.
Well,
good on you.
Yeah. I suppose. I mean, I suppose, you know, retirement is a kind of period of change in your life anyway, and I certainly don't feel at all like the same person that I used to be, and I just, in many respects, wish that I had woken up to the climate situation a long time ago and done more sooner, because that's the kind of missed opportunity that we'll never get the chance to go back. So.
Well, you're taking action now, and that's very impressive. That's great. And it's interesting, we were talking about your climate scarf, which I'll put a photo up of that, about really a visual change that, you know, it's kind of undeniable a bit, isn't it?
Yes. I had found, I've been quite new to Instagram, but I had found a very nice person on Instagram who was providing yarn, which was all various different colours all knotted together in a great big long length, and you just then knit it up, and it knits up to a visual representation in a scarf of the global average temperature each year from 1919 to 2018, and it starts off blue and it works its way through various colour changes to quite red and horrendous at the end. And it was actually really quite interesting when I was knitting it. You know, you're knitting away and la 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 la, and then it starts to get redder and you're going, oh, I don't like this. And actually it was really quite quite stressful at the end, finishing it off, because it was such a strong message about, look at this temperature. How can we possibly be not, be ignoring this, as a country and as a government? How can we not be doing more?